blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Saturday, Sunday, December 13th and 14th, 2025 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. U.S. sends in more firepower to turn up heat on Venezuela by Shelby Holiday and Costas Paris. The U.S. military is moving more weapons and units into the Caribbean that give President Trump powerful new options to escalate his pressure campaign on Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and potentially bring him down. After weeks of deadly boat strikes and the seizure of an oil tanker, the Pentagon is moving more assets into the region that would bolster its ability to conduct land strikes, disable Venezuela's defenses, and enforce an oil embargo. The array of military forces poses a direct threat not only to Maduro but also his neighboring allies such as Cuba. F-35A stealth jet fighters, Growler electronic warfare planes, HH-60 rescue helicopters, and HC-130J rescue planes are being staged in Puerto Rico, according to photographs and flight tracking data. Tanker aircraft that can refuel bombers and jet fighters mid-air have also been moved to the Dominican Republic in recent days. Such aircraft could play a key role in any attack on land, analysts say. The deployments add to the massive amount of combat power that has already been shifted to the region in recent months, including 11 warships, MQ-9 Reaper drones, F-35B jet fighters, and P-8 Poseidon spy planes, among other weaponry. The arrival of the USS Gerald R. Ford last month brought dozens of aircraft into the region that could also be used in airstrikes. Some of the latest aircraft movement was earlier reported by The War Zone. Trump has threatened to up the ante by attacking targets on land after months of bombing alleged drug smuggling boats off the coast of Venezuela and beyond. The administration also seized an oil tanker full of Venezuelan crude, opening a new front in the pressure campaign. Trump has also said that he has authorized covert CIA operations in Venezuela. Military analysts say the recent movements of equipment further signals the administration's intent to carry out combat operations. The buildup also means the U.S. has the resources in place to seize more oil tankers if Trump chooses to do so. I think what's important about the forces and capabilities that are moving into the theater is that they are optimized to conduct precision, stealthy strikes that can minimize collateral damage, said Heather Penny, a former fighter pilot and director of studies and research at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, a think tank. All of them together work in concert to open up the battle space and conduct precision strikes with minimum risk to U.S. forces, she said. Regional analysts and former government officials have warned that U.S. military action in Venezuela could spiral into a wider crisis across Latin America. Cuba, which suffers from severe energy shortages, relies on Venezuela for oil, and any conflict could quickly spill across the porous borders with Colombia, where armed groups rule much of the frontier. This could be devastating, not only for Venezuela but also for the region, said Francesca Emanuel, Senior International Policy Associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research in Washington. These actions would almost certainly lead to a civil war or a prolonged, devastating conflict. The next step in the U.S. campaign against Maduro may not be combat, but enforcing an oil embargo on Venezuela, either a physical one or a de facto one, if ships steer clear of the country, said Ivanin Romero, a Houston energy consultant and former Venezuelan deputy foreign minister. The U.S. has sanctioned Venezuelan crude oil, giving the Trump administration a basis to more strictly enforce those measures. Only Chevron legally exports Venezuelan oil, but a vast fleet of tankers still carry it, using false flags and opaque ownership to shield their operations. You get rid of the oil, we're talking about the final collapse, said Romero, who is advising opposition leader Maria Corina Machado on an oil sector recovery plan. Inside Venezuela, port officials said local authorities had warned them that American strikes are likely. An official at Venezuela's second largest airport in Valencia said anti-aircraft guns had been deployed near the runway and storage buildings. He said more than 80% of flights have been canceled in the past 2 weeks. The port officials said ship traffic is nearly at a standstill. On Friday, at least a dozen container ships and tankers reversed course as they were approaching to dock. Trump hasn't ruled out a land invasion, but military experts said even the large number of forces in the Caribbean falls short of what would be needed to conquer a country as large as Venezuela. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt said Thursday that, quote, prolonged war is definitely not something this president is interested in, end quote. Targeting airstrikes or targeted airstrikes on land are far more likely. Such an operation would likely begin with cyber operations and satellite jamming to disable Venezuelan's military's ability to use its relatively sophisticated Russian air defense systems. These efforts may already be underway to help prepare the battlefield, analysts said. Southern Command, which oversees U.S. troops in the region, declined to comment on the movement of equipment. Analysts say it would make sense to station electronic warfare systems as close to the battlefield as possible. The daring escape that almost failed. Venezuelan Nobel winner was lost in dangerous waters before perilous rescue. By Jose de Corba, Vera Bergruen, and Alex Leary. Maria, a man's voice cut through the rain pelting the pitch-black Caribbean Sea, just audible between two boats tossed around by 10-foot waves. People on the smaller vessel, a simple fishing skiff, held up cell phones like emergency flares in the night. The larger craft pulled closer. A figure bundled in a bulky jacket and a black cap waved her arms. "It's me, Maria." Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado had just endured the most perilous leg of her escape from her country on her way to receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Norway. It was early Tuesday when the extraction team rescued her. Part of it was recorded on video viewed by the Wall Street Journal. For 3 hours, Machado and a small crew drifted on the skiff in the Gulf of Venezuela after its GPS fell overboard on rough seas and a backup failed. She didn't meet the extraction team at a designated point, setting off a scramble to find her in the dangerous waters. Brian Stern, a U.S. combat veteran sent to extract Machado from Venezuela, said he hauled her onto the bigger boat and gave her snacks, Gatorade, and a sweater. He alerted his team that she was on board. Jackpot, jackpot, jackpot. In a proof-of-life video sent to U.S. officials and shared with the Journal, Machado tried to steady herself as the boat tosses on the waves. "My name is Maria Corina Machado," she says. "I am alive, safe, and very grateful." Stern, who leads an organization specializing in such extractions, staffed by former special operations and intelligence veterans, called the mission Operation Golden Dynamite. It is a reference to the Nobel Peace Prize and its founder, Alfred Nobel, the Swedish chemist who invented dynamite. New details from Stern and another person familiar with the operation, as well as time-stamped text messages, videos, and photos of the mission reviewed by the Journal, paint a picture of a dangerous expedition that nearly failed. Over 3 days, Stern and more than 36 associates spirited the chief rival of Venezuela's authoritarian leader, Nicolas Maduro, out of the country amid the Trump administration's escalating campaign to force him from power. She has lived in hiding since a 2024 election that she was barred from running in, but her party nonetheless won, according to the U.S., results Maduro ignored. Stern said he was in constant touch with senior U.S. military officials before and during the operation. At one point, they asked if the military could spot Machado's boat when they lost communication with it. The State Department and the Pentagon referred questions to the White House. The White House didn't respond to requests for comment. Administration officials earlier disputed military contact. The operation was funded by private donors, said Stern, without Washington money, but U.S. officials from the White House to senior military officers to regional diplomats followed the journey in real time through WhatsApp messages and voice memos from Stern and his team. Machado's odyssey took nearly 3 days. She traveled by land from a Caracas suburb to a fishing village on Venezuela's Caribbean coast, and then by boat to the Dutch island of Curacao, which took roughly 12 hours. From there, a private jet flew her to Oslo. She just missed Wednesday's prize ceremony. Her daughter accepted the award. Stern's operation kicked off at 9 p.m. on Friday, December 5th, when he got a call from a former colleague who used to work in U.S. intelligence. His contact said he had a special assignment to extract an important package from Venezuela. When his contact slipped that it was a her, Stern knew it was Machado. He also knew it would be the most high-stakes extraction of his career. This is a counter-intel guy's dream or nightmare. Extracting Machado would entail moving an instantly recognizable person. Moving Maria is like moving Hillary Clinton, Stern said. On Monday afternoon, Machado left her hideout in a wig and a disguise. The plan, Stern said, was for Machado and her associates to rendezvous with operatives in the fishing village, then travel on their small boat to a meeting point in the middle of the sea. From there, Stern would take her to Curacao. Almost immediately, things started to go wrong. The operatives waiting for Machado at the beach were struggling with mechanical issues. They chose a rundown fishing boat, hoping to distinguish it from the boats used by drug smugglers that the U.S. had been bombing. Fixing the engine problem caused a 12-hour delay. Machado and the crew planned to leave at dawn on Tuesday, but left as the sun was setting. Once at sea, the open boat faced waves up to 10 feet, Stern said. While the poor conditions slowed them, it also helped hide the vessel from maritime radar, he said. Getting bombed by the U.S. was a worry. The Trump administration has mounted the largest military buildup in the region has seen in decades, sinking more than 20 alleged drug smuggling vessels. Stern said he told U.S. defense officials that he was operating in the area. He knew that 2 boats doing a handoff would look suspicious. Stern said he told U.S. military contacts, number 1, keep an eye on us. Number 2, don't kill us. And number 3, if you're doing something, let us know and we'll get out of the way. Stern approached the pickup point close to sunset. He texted a senior U.S. Navy officer with their location and a description of the operation. 6 hours later, Machado's boat still hadn't arrived. More alarmingly, it had gone dark. She didn't show, Stern texted the U.S. military official in messages he read to the Journal. Any eyes in the sky? The officer texted back, ugh, got cold feet? Maybe reset and try again. Stern stuck it out. Gonna hold for 2 hours, give them a chance. Meanwhile, Stern feared his boat was a sitting duck for Venezuelan security forces. We're gonna get real quiet, real low, turn off everything. At about 11 p.m., communication crackled to life. Machado's boat was off the agreed-on meeting point by 25 miles. When they located the skiff, they flashed a light on the passengers to make sure they weren't armed. Machado boarded the second vessel. Hi, my name is Brian Stern. Nice to meet you, he told Machado. He sent a photo to U.S. government and military officials showing them with tired smiles on the dark boat. On the ride to Curacao, Machado talked mostly about her daughter, whom she hasn't seen for 2 years, Stern said. In Curacao, Stern said, he spoke to Dutch authorities but didn't brief them to keep them from being thought complicit and drawing in the ire of neighboring Venezuela. Curacao allows a 24-hour window to formally enter the country and go through customs. Machado only stayed a few hours. Wednesday, she boarded a private jet that had flown there from Miami. It left for Oslo at 6:42 a.m. There, in a speech to supporters, she called the rescue a miracle. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Coaches arrest mired Michigan in chaos. On Wednesday morning, Sharon Moore was the head coach of the Michigan football team, preparing his players to face Texas in the Citrus Bowl. At 39, he was running one of the most celebrated programs in the game just 2 years after helping it win a national championship as an offensive coordinator. By Wednesday morning, he was in jail. Moore had been fired by the university and arrested for an alleged assault following the revelation of sexual relationship with a female member of Michigan's football staff. The stunning escalation immediately upended one of the richest, most powerful institutions in college sports. But this past week's turn of events had been brewing over the course of a 2-month internal saga that finally erupted when Moore's behavior suddenly burst into view. On Friday, Moore was charged with a felony count of home invasion and 2 misdemeanors, including stalking, the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office said. He appeared remotely via live stream in court Friday and later was released after posting a $25,000 bond. Moore is barred from contacting the alleged victim, will have to wear a monitoring bracelet, and can't leave the state without court permission. A court magistrate entered a not guilty plea for Moore. Joseph Simon, an attorney for Moore, declined further comment. In mid-October, a tipster had contacted the university, first alleging that the football coach had conducted an inappropriate relationship with someone on his staff, according to a person familiar with the situation. The university opened an investigation but found no evidence to confirm the tip, since both Moore and the woman involved denied the relationship. Still, the university hired an outside law firm to dig into the matter. On Wednesday, the woman contacted the firm to say that she had in fact had a relationship with Moore for roughly 2 years, until 2024, the person familiar said. She added that there were email, text, and phone records to prove it. That's when the university decided to cut ties with Moore. It's also when the situation began to spiral out of control. Around mid-afternoon Wednesday, Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel called Moore into his office for a meeting. Moore asked if he was being fired, the person said. Manuel said yes. Moore became visibly emotional and left. Separately, Manuel gathered Michigan's football players. They had known Moore as the leader of Michigan's offense during its 2023 national championship team, and the man who had taken over as head coach after Jim Harbaugh left to coach in the NFL. Manuel told them that Moore had been fired. Around 4:45 p.m., the university announced the same news to the world. In a public statement, Manuel explained that Moore's contract had been terminated for cause because he had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member, a clear violation of the university's policy. Meanwhile, a chaotic scene was unfolding. After leaving Michigan's football facility, Moore returned home and grabbed a knife, the university was told, and at 4:10 p.m., police were called to investigate an alleged assault in Pittsfield Township, just south of the Ann Arbor campus. Emergency dispatchers told police to head to an address on Ann Arbor Saline Road, according to a dispatch audio reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. The address matches one belonging to a female member of the football staff who worked closely with Moore, according to public records. A woman at the address said that a man had entered her home and attacked her, according to the dispatch audio. The man also threatened to harm himself, according to the audio call. He did put a knife to his throat, a dispatcher said. Just before 5 p.m., a dispatcher said that S1, referring to the man who left the Ann Arbor Saline Road address, was at an unknown parking lot. We are attempting to have wife contact him to try to come home, a dispatch said. Police in nearby Saline assisted in detaining Moore, who was then turned over to Pittsfield Township authorities, according to a Saline official. By 8:30 p.m., Moore was booked into the Washtenaw County Jail in Ann Arbor, where he spent Wednesday and Thursday nights. Moore had been involved with the woman from roughly 2022 to 2024 when she ended the relationship, according to a person familiar with the situation. Sometime after Moore became head coach in early 2024, the woman received a significant raise, according to an online record. According to a university policy, a supervisor may not initiate an intimate relationship with someone over whom they exercise supervisory authority. At least 2 other women told officials that Moore had made unwanted advances toward them online, the person familiar said. On Thursday, Michigan Interim President Domenico Grasso sent a message to colleagues and students about Moore's firing and invited anyone with information to contact a law firm, Jenner and Block LLP. The firm didn't respond to requests for comment. All of the facts here must be known, Grasso wrote. Preservation group sues over East Wing demolition by Victoria Albert. A historical preservation group sued Friday over President Trump's effort to demolish the White House's East Wing and build an expansive ballroom in its place, urging a court to pause construction pending further review. The lawsuit, filed by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in the United States, alleges that the destruction of the East Wing and the planned construction of the ballroom should have been subject to several federal reviews before it ever began. The project is set to add at least 90,000 square feet to the White House complex. The suit was filed in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. It accuses Trump and administration officials of violating laws that required outside input on the project's environmental, historic, and aesthetic impacts, and said construction must stop until such reviews are complete. The case was assigned to Judge Richard Leon, a George W. Bush appointee. No president is legally allowed to tear down portions of the White House without any review whatsoever. Not President Trump, not President Biden, not anyone else. The Trust, a private nonprofit chartered by Congress to support preservation efforts, said in the suit. A White House spokesman said the renovation of efforts were within the president's purview. President Trump has full legal authority to modernize, renovate, and beautify the White House, just like all of his predecessors, the spokesman said. A hearing has been set for Tuesday on the National Trust for Historic Preservation's request for an order temporarily halting construction. The lawsuit adds to a widespread feud over plans for the ballroom. Trump and his supporters say it will modernize the White House and afford a proper space for grand events. Critics say Trump, barreling through bureaucracy to reshape an iconic piece of American history, reflects a wider disdain for democratic norms. A major point of debate is the role of the National Capital Planning Commission. A review from the commission is one of the few bureaucratic steps necessary to make changes to the White House. Trump overhauled the commission this past summer and installed his own loyalists. Administration officials have said the commission's authority only covers a new construction, and it didn't have to get approval from for the demolition. The White House is expected to formally submit construction plans to the commission later this month. The National Trust for Historic Preservation disagreed, arguing the administration unlawfully ignored several steps it was required to take before ever breaking ground. The president has pointed to the construction of the ballroom as a key part of his presidential legacy. It is expected to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, funded by multi-million-dollar donations from major companies and by president's personal friends. Trump said in October that he had raised $350 million, some of which might be used for other projects. Fed officials diverge over inflation risks. Public comments underscore why recent meeting was so contentious, by Nick Timiraos and Matt Grossman. Federal Reserve officials reinforced Friday why this past week's rate cut was so contentious. In public comments, one argued that the central bank had room to keep cutting if the labor market softens, and others warned that rate cuts could threaten the Fed's hard-won work on inflation. The central bank voted 9-3 Wednesday to cut its benchmark rate by a quarter point, to a range between 3.5 and 3.75%. Two voters favored no cut, and one preferred a larger reduction. It was the first time since 2019 that three policymakers had formally dissented. One of this past week's dissenters, Kansas City Fed President Jeff Schmid, said Friday he opposed cutting rates because he doesn't see evidence that interest rates are putting downward pressure on inflation by slowing economic activity on balance. Right now I see an economy that is showing momentum and inflation that is too hot, suggesting that policy is not overly restrictive. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee, who also voted against cutting, suggested his disagreement centered more on tactical considerations. He backed cuts in September and October and said Friday he thought the Fed could continue lowering rates but didn't want to move so aggressively because inflation has been stubborn. If we can just get the dust out of the air, fundamentally, rates can go down a fair amount from where they are today, Goolsbee said at a conference in Chicago. The Fed's 12-person rate-setting committee is composed of all 7 Washington-based governors, the New York Fed president, and then 4 of 11 other regional presidents who vote on a rotating basis. Schmidt and Goolsbee will hand off their votes next year, but 2 of the presidents replacing them, Beth Hammack of the Cleveland Fed and Lori Logan of the Dallas Fed, have recently sounded cautious about bringing rates lower as well. Hammack said Friday she thought rates were close to a neutral level, that neither spurs nor slows growth, and that she thought a more restrictive stance was warranted. Philadelphia Fed President Anna Paulson, also a 2026 voter, largely echoed the case Fed Chair Jerome Powell made Wednesday in support of the cut and suggested the bank should leave all of its options open at its coming meetings. On net, I'm still a little more concerned about labor market weakness than about upside risks to inflation, she said in a speech Friday. Recent divisions reflect a dilemma the Fed hasn't faced in more than 15 years. Stubborn inflation that calls for higher rates, paired with a softening job market that suggests a need for lower rates. So what do? Powell said Wednesday. You've got one tool. You can't do two things at once. Paulson said she is more focused on the job market because she sees a, quote, decent chance inflation will decline next year as the effects of tariff increases fade and housing costs contribute to slower price growth. At the same time, demand for workers has fallen faster than the supply of available workers, pushing the unemployment rate higher. While the job market is okay, the risk of a sharper slowdown are elevated, she said. By cutting rates by a combined 0.75 point at its last three meetings, we've taken out some insurance against further labor market deterioration, she said. She said the current level of rates, together with the cumulative effect of the past restrictiveness, should contribute to a somewhat restrictive policy stance that helps bring inflation down. GOP relives healthcare nightmare. Repealing or replacing the ACA has vexed the party for a decade. By Natalie Andrews. Republicans suffered through a recurring nightmare this past week. Their inability to replace or at least unwind the Affordable Care Act, President Barack Obama's signature healthcare program. For the last decade, President Trump and the party have raged against the 2010 law, only to see legislative attempts to decouple it from the American economy fail. This past week was no different, as a Republican proposal to replace ACA subsidies with sending federal funds directly to some households for out-of-pocket healthcare costs failed to advance in the Republican-controlled Senate. For some Republican lawmakers, a sense of deja vu set in this past week, that the issue may once again cost the party its political majorities. We run on this every time. There's not an election that comes up where we don't get beat up on healthcare, said Representative Jen Kiggins, a Virginia Republican facing one of the most competitive races next year, who has led a bipartisan effort to extend the subsidies for 1 year while negotiations continue. A separate Democratic proposal to extend the enhanced COVID-era ACA subsidies for 3 years also failed to pass in the Senate Thursday, despite the support of 4 Republicans. Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Josh Hawley of Missouri. Combined, the failed votes increase the likelihood that millions of Americans will see their healthcare premiums rise next year during a pivotal midterm campaign season. Democrats say they plan to make the issue a centerpiece of their effort to flip both chambers of Congress. House Republicans hold a narrow 220 to 213 majority, while senators hold a balance of 53 to 47. 60 votes are needed to advance most legislation in the Senate. Democrats believe increased healthcare costs next year will benefit them, noting the ACA debt debate comes after Republicans cut Medicaid funding in their tax bill in July. People are feeling the impact of their politics and decisions, and they also see Republicans have no idea how to move forward, said Representative Suzanne DelBene of Washington, the chairwoman of House Democrats' campaign arm. House Democrats expanded the races they see as competitive this past week, due to successful wins in elections this year in Miami, New Jersey, and Virginia, and because they see strength in campaigning on this issue. The focus on health insurance premiums has moved the political discussion onto one of the few topics on which Democrats have an advantage. Americans' approval of the ACA edged up to a new high of 57% in December, according to a Gallup poll. An NBC poll in October found that Democrats hold a 23-point advantage among registered voters over Republicans on the party best equipped to deal with health care. Democrats made voting on a bill to extend enhanced subsidies the central negotiating point in ending the government shutdown this fall, putting the issue in front and center. While a group of Democrats eventually voted with Republicans to reopen the government without any concessions, they did secure the pledge from GOP leaders to hold this past week's vote. Republicans are caught between the relief among many GOP lawmakers that markets rather than expensive government programs should play the leading role in providing coverage, and the fact that many GOP voters have come to rely on coverage from the law, often called Obamacare. The GOP plan for health savings accounts could help with out-of-pocket costs for people with eligible insurance plans, but it doesn't address the fundamental problem for individuals who are unable to afford insurance. It also is unlikely to be adequate for many insured people who need expensive care. Insurance plans that are paired with HSAs can be very skinny, with high deductibles, which could force some enrollees to pay more than $10,000 next year before coverage kicks in. That cost would far surpass the up to $1,500 the Republican bill would put into accounts to cover out-of-pocket expenses. Republicans' healthcare conundrum helps explain why some GOP senators broke ranks to vote with Democrats on opening debate on extending the subsidies. I'm in favor of working on something, you know, Senator Hawley, one of the 4 Republicans to back the Democrats' proposal, said. In the House, Kiggins has led a bipartisan effort to extend the subsidies for 1 year, to buy time to debate broader solution, while other Republicans have backed her other similar plans. Late Friday, House Republicans released a plan that included a grab bag of ideas from earlier GOP proposals, including government funding for the ACA's cost-sharing reductions for low-income enrollees, and help for association health plans, which let people and small businesses band together for coverage. But it didn't continue the enhanced ACA subsidies. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Army changes its look in Pacific. U.S. rethinks its tools and tactics as it prepares for conflict with China. By Niharika Mandahana, Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. A winged drone circles 2,000 feet above the jungle. 3 packs, says U.S. Army Specialist Josiah Witt, counting enemy troops on a laptop screen. It has been an unusual year for soldiers like him. We get a drone, we train on it, then we get a new drone, train on it, test it out, said the 20-year-old, who learned to fly the Stalker less than a month earlier. Crouched under a green poncho, Sergeant Nicholas Cole Hagler lifted a C-100 quadcopter, one of 5 drone systems the 22-year-old has been taught in quick succession, and 23-year-old Sergeant Brock Beckman's vehicle, 3D printed drones that dive and explode with a nudge of the thumb. These young American soldiers are preparing for the next war in the Pacific. They brought out some of their newest gear for large-scale Army exercises in November that unfolded over 2 weeks across several Hawaiian islands. Such systems dominate the battlefield in Ukraine and Russia. The U.S., long reliant on expensive fighting kit and extended processes, is trying to catch up, shifting to a new era marked by nimble, relatively cheap, and expendable equipment. The timing is tricky. The world's preeminent military power must rethink its tried and tested tools and tactics, even as it girds for one of its most vexing challenges since World War II, potential great power conflict with China. For the U.S. Army in particular, which spent 2 decades fighting insurgencies in Iraq and Afghanistan, the future conflicts may be different on fundamental counts: where, how, and against whom. China has one of the world's largest missile arsenals and unrivaled industrial strength to buoy forces in a protracted war. Fighting it in the Pacific would involve a vast watery battlespace speckled with jungle-swathed island chains, all within reach of those missiles. That means the U.S. can't expect to rule the skies and would struggle to resupply scattered troops. The Army is thinking boats, buggies, and bombardment. Docked at a Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam during the exercises was a small new watercraft designed to move equipment straight to a beach. Soldiers zip around in light, maneuverable vehicles out of a Mad Max movie that one military official called the biggest game changer since Night Vision. To prepare for cross-island fight, clunkier cannon artillery has made its way for shoot-and-scoot HIMARS missile platforms 16 of which arrived in Hawaii this year. Atop the maritime littorals is the 21st century problem of air littorals, airspace between the earth and high skies where drones lurk, hunt, and kill. Soldiers navigating Hawaiian terrain took great pains to blend into it, shrinking command posts to a handful of trucks, draping vehicles with camouflage nets and vegetation, and painting their faces with thick strips of green. The truth of the modern battlefield is that everyone can be seen, said Major General James Barthelmess, commander of the Army's 25th Infantry Division that focuses on the Indo-Pacific. Soldiers must prepare to fight with drones, against drones, and via electronic warfare. Looking up and dealing with first contact from the sky or the electromagnetic spectrum is the new reality, said Barthelmess. Troops are experimenting with a smorgasbord of buzzing, flying machines, launching more than 600 flights over 2 weeks during the exercises, and layering them through the depth of the battlefield. They are learning that drones tested successfully elsewhere in the world can wobble in tropical heat. Cloud cover can mean defaulting to human senses over drone sensors. They are also thinking of ways to stymie enemy drones without accidentally thwarting their own. Several dozen M4 assault rifles now have smart shooter add-ons that can lock onto a flying drone and fire a round when the target is aligned. A higher-tech new arrival, a wearable drone blocker with 2 units roughly the size of iPhones. One called Wingman detects incoming drones, and the other, Pitbull, disrupts or jams the drone with what amounts to an electromagnetic arrow. Jamming, however, means showing oneself on the electromagnetic spectrum. It's a bit of a cat-and-mouse game that we're watching and learning from in Ukraine, said Barthelmess. There are vignettes that are easily seen on YouTube of how you see a drone that's defeated in one way, and then there's a counter that's already planned. The 2 mobile brigades that make up Barthelmess' division, each about 3,500 personnel strong, have both been through what the Army calls transformation in contact, the whirlwind shift toward new technology. The difference is night and day, said Sergeant First Class Kakamo Man Tomita, 31. In about a year, his infantry platoon went from having one kind of drone, a small quadcopter, to 7 types of experiment with. The amount of systems and different assets that we've had is just insane, he said. On a recent afternoon, he learned the art of kamikaze-style attacks using a flock of drones. The chassis of the quadcopters were 3D printed in-house, while the technology to move and attack as a swarm came from Auterion, a company that makes autonomous drone operating systems. The company's crew was in Hawaii's jungles to troubleshoot. 7 drones soared. With clicks on a screen, 2 peeled off to swoop down for the kill. Tracking the hit from a shrouded nook between towering trees, Tomita reflected on the new world of deadly drone wars. It's very, very terrifying, to be frank, he said. Tomita's brigade was playing the adversary in an exercise scenario that could someday be a reality. A U.S. allies' island territory is under attack. Enemy forces have landed, and America joins the fight several weeks in. China and Taiwan weren't mentioned, but the parallels are evident. If Beijing invaded and the U.S. decided to come to the island's democracy's aid, American soldiers might find themselves fighting in the first island chain where Taiwan is located between Japan and the Philippines. To better prepare them for a war like that, a new combat training center called the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center was created in 2022 in Hawaii. During the last month's exercises, it brought together more than 8,000 personnel, largely from the U.S., but also from places including Taiwan, France, and Malaysia. Soldiers executed air assaults, simulated missile shots across islands, navigated gulches, and slept fitfully under the trees. It was the first year of exercises where both sides, American soldiers playing themselves and the enemy, were given the latest systems the Army is trying out. We have new tech against new tech, said Colonel Matthew P. LeClaire, who leads the training center. Evaluators were looking to see who used it better, how, and why. The best way to do it then becomes the doctrine, he said. Next year, one of the 2 brigades will go out to the Philippines to stress test its takeaways, part of a rotation that allows them to take turns training in forward locations. We can quickly turn lessons learned, said Command Sergeant Major Sean Curry of the 25th Infantry Division. Did it work here in Hawaii? And then does it work in the first island chain in 100-degree heat, in 100% humidity? Magazine depth. The Army wants to change not just what it buys, but how it buys, since fast-paced technological shifts can render new equipment obsolete within months. It is trying to break out a laborious acquisition process and also give commanders some flexibility to curate their own shopping carts. Like Amazon, said Curry. To be ready for a near-term conflict, however, the U.S. also needs to scale up. Ukraine and Russia are making millions of drones a year, and China can outproduce them both. The U.S. Army hopes to spur domestic drone production during the next few years. The one fear I have is that we develop an army of amazing prototypes, but we don't have a deep enough magazine depth, said Benjamin Jensen, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Citizen journalist is held by ICE. A Chinese citizen who fled the country after gathering evidence of alleged human rights violations against the nation's Uyghur population is at risk of being returned there after being detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, his supporters said. Heng Guan is jailed in an upstate New York jail, awaiting an immigration hearing on Monday that could lead to his removal from the U.S. and ultimately land him back in China, according to his lawyer and a New York-based activist group, Human Rights in China. The group says the 38-year-old arrived in the U.S. illegally in 2021 and was detained in August during an ICE operations targeting his roommate. Guan's name appears through an online portal of ICE detainees, indicating he was held in New York State. The agency and the Broome County Jail, where his supporters say Guan is being held, didn't respond to questions. A native of north-central China, Guan has embarked on a citizen journalism project in 2020 to check Western media reports that ethnic Uyghurs were being imprisoned in huge numbers at camps around the Xinjiang region. Chuang Chen, a lawyer for Guan, said Monday's online hearing will give the detainee his first opportunity to state his case and for a judge to hear from his supporters. Chen said that while he doubts such a complex case can be resolved in one hearing, Guan is bracing for a relatively quick decision. Chen said a judge on Friday denied a request to release Guan on bond for jurisdictional reasons. Battlefield officers defy claims that Ukraine is losing. Kiev faces hurdles, but analysts say a Russian breakthrough is highly unlikely. Kiev, Ukraine. By James Marson, Michael Gordon, and Evgenia Savorka. President Trump says Ukraine is losing the war against Russia. That's not what it looks like to Ukrainian Army Major Ola Hlushko, a battalion commander whose men repelled another assault on their part of the southeastern front this past week. Occasionally, they manage to raise their flags and claim that a position has been taken, but we then conduct clearing operations, removing symbols, and the position remains under our control, said Hlushko of the separate presidential brigade. The different perceptions of the battlefield make it harder for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to compromise on Russian demands that Kiev hand over territory that Moscow hasn't conquered as part of a U.S.-backed plan. Ukraine faces severe challenges, primarily in recruiting enough personnel, leaving frontline units short on infantry and brittle. Russia also has made advances in drone warfare that some analysts say has neutralized what was once a Ukrainian advantage. Moscow this month claimed its first major conquest in more than 2 years, the city of Pokrovsk, although Ukraine disputes its capture. Senior Western military officers and frontline Ukrainian officers say that Russia's military isn't on the verge of a breakthrough. Though Kiev's military position has been eroding, its forces are still inflicting heavy casualties, meaning small Russian gains come at a heavy cost. What we see at the battlefield is, of course, still advances, but marginal advances. Radmila Shekerinska, Deputy Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, said Wednesday. Ukraine is, of course, facing a very difficult winter, she added. Numbers matter in war, so it is difficult actually to reconstitute and constantly move more or fresh troops on the battlefield. But Ukraine's bravery has been compensating for these deficiencies. The West also has the means to influence the battlefield. Western military officials say Kiev needs more air defense systems to fend off Russia's relentless drone and missile attacks. as well as artillery to compensate for winter weather that can hamper the use of explosive drones. Russia has sought to shape Western opinion and the fitful negotiations by touting the narrative that a Ukrainian collapse is inevitable. Russia is using its larger military to probe for weak spots where it can advance, which Ukraine seeks to stem by redeploying units. Hlushko of Ukraine's separate presidential brigade said his unit fought off a typical Russian assault on Wednesday, destroying a couple of military vehicles as the Russians sought to take advantage of snowy weather. He said his men usually can eliminate the small infantry groups that Russia uses as assaults, but they sometimes sneak through because of the sheer numbers. A Ukrainian army lieutenant colonel in the 56th Brigade said the Russians recently rotated in new forces to force a breakthrough in the Chashiv Yar area, which the battalion he commands has defended for 2 years. Despite intensified Russian use of drone and missile strikes and probing infantry assaults, they have failed to achieve that, said the officer. Analysts noted that the slow pace of the Russian advance doesn't tell the full story of the state of the war, as Moscow is engaged in attritional warfare aimed at grinding down Kiev's resources in manpower and equipment. What Ukrainian forces have done is that they have bought a lot of time, said Pasi Paronin, an analyst with the Blackbird Group in Finland, uses publicly available information to assess the battlefield. But how much it has cost them, that's a very crucial question. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. On Front Line, Zelensky hails Kiev's resilience by Matthew Luxmore. Kiev, Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made a dramatic statement of defiance Friday, releasing a video filmed on the edge of a besieged city whose capture Russia touted nearly a month ago. Zelensky's video came as his troops said they successfully counterattacked in the city, Kupiansk, defying the Kremlin's attempt to depict its nearly 4-year invasion as an inexorable advance. Standing next to a sign marking the northeastern city's entrance, Zelensky thanked Ukrainian troops for strengthening Ukraine's hand in U.S.-backed talks to end the war. The Russians kept going on about Kupiansk, he said, as the sound of explosions echoed from the city behind him. The reality speaks for itself. Zelensky's visit came at a critical time. President Trump has said Ukraine is losing the war and wants Kiev to make a quick deal, even at the cost of major concessions to Russia. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff will meet with Zelensky and European leaders in Berlin this weekend, officials said. The decision to dispatch Witkoff, who has spearheaded talks with Ukraine and Russia on a U.S. peace plan, underscores the accelerating U.S. push to narrow differences between Kiev and Washington on the peace plan. French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz will attend, officials said. Russian President Vladimir Putin last month predicted the imminent collapse of Kiev's forces, pointing to the supposed capture of Kupiansk as a portent of further Russian breakthroughs across the front line. Kiev is jockeying to maintain U.S. support during talks and pushing back against Russian demands that it hand over territory Moscow hasn't taken. The Kartia Corps of Ukraine's National Guard on Friday said it pushed Russian troops out of several districts in northern Kupiansk and took back a string of villages in the area. Achieving results on the front line is crucial so that Ukraine can achieve results in diplomacy, Zelensky said. In an interview Friday, Lieutenant General Kyrylo Budanov, Ukraine's military intelligence chief, said Ukrainian forces are far from losing their capacity to repel Russia, issuing an assessment that contrasts with the dreary picture painted by Ukraine's negotiating partners. There is a relatively stable front line, and breaking through it is extremely difficult, he said, adding that neither side has the capacity for a breakthrough. Moving now to opinion. Trump may be losing his touch. Declarations by Peggy Noonan. Donald Trump in his tumult nearly 11 months in. He's a rocket going not up but sideways or down. All polls say down. On Thursday, APNROC reported his approval on the economy and immigration has fallen substantially since the spring, with 31% of Americans approving his handling of economic matters, down from 40% in March, and his approval on immigration at 38%, down from 49%. Recent Democratic sweeps in New Jersey and Virginia and this week's Miami mayoral race make 2026 look distinctly blue-tinged. In fairness, 11 months as president is long enough to get on everyone's nerves, to disappoint your fans and infuriate your foes. But he's in a fix, surrounded by mood shifts, challenges, and bad signs. His Capitol Hill base, for once, and famously began to kick away this summer, with loyalists breaking with him on the Jeffrey Epstein files and Georgia Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene on other issues as well. She's leaving Congress, but not looking like someone who lost her battles with Mr. Trump. His problem: once someone makes a successful jailbreak, all the other prisoners know a jailbreak is possible. This changes the conversation in the prison yard. Guards are eyed differently, and the warden's mystique is diminished. Outside Washington, Mr. Trump's base is fighting with itself. America First is saying, "I'm not MAGA." Conspiracists all over. Israel killed Charlie. The assassination of Charlie Kirk looks increasingly like an epical event. Did he understand how much he was holding together the Trumpian right? Without the force of his mediating presence, they are cracking up. Percolating below, unseen, is the price you pay in time for success. The president's border triumph will likely weaken his and MAGA's political position. He shut down illegal immigration on the southern border, which has been more or less open for decades. But it was anger at illegal immigration that kept his base cleaved to him and allied with each other. Remove the issue that made you, and you can no longer use it to gain votes or maintain unity. This is the paradox of politics. Every time you solve a major problem, you're removing a weapon from your political arsenal. What happens when you lose your great issue? What happens when all that remains of that issue is its least popular aspect? Immigration remains in the news only because of brutal deportation practices. It isn't build the wall anymore. It's don't arrest the poor guy working the line in a second job at the chicken processing plant. Americans don't want that guy thrown out. The longer the deportation continue, the more unpopular and damaging the administration they will become. There is the matter of his mouth. The president's supporters have for 10 years put up with his babyish obsession with insulting people. They think of it as the Trump tax, the price you pay for getting someone bold and tough. But his hate-stoking now is in an era of political violence is going to get someone hurt. In his Truth Social post Tuesday night, he used criminal language about the press, news outlets, and reporters are, quote, seditious, perhaps even treasonous, end quote. They, quote, libel and demean the President of the United States, end quote. They are, start quote, true enemies of the people, and we should do something about it, end quote. Like what? It isn't 2015. We're more on edge. In a darker time, he's going to find in the polls fewer people willing to pay the Trump tax. Obviously, inflation is the so far immovable thing, and he's bungled his response. Affordability is a Democratic hoax, a scam, a mere political talking point. He sounded like Lyndon B. Johnson, who late in his second term was reported to have said, when the public started turning on the effects of his economic policies, "You've never had it so good." That's the sound of true presidential detachment. I work so hard, you're a bunch of spoiled babies. House Minority Leader Gerald Ford beat Johnson around the head for that at a 1967 Lincoln Day dinner. Quote, "I cannot conceive of a Lincoln telling the people, you never had it so good. When consumer prices are soaring, the working man's real spending earnings are slipping, and the farmer's parity ratio is falling hard and fast." People on the ground feel tremors presidents can't feel. They see Mr. Trump flying around the world on his missions and tearing up the White House East Wing to build a ballroom. All that feels like what presidents do when things are going well, in a boom everyone is experiencing. People don't feel that way now. It isn't only inflation spreading unease. Artificial intelligence is coming. It's going to change the entire employment picture in America over the next few years. It's going to eat jobs and people with imagination. And America is nothing if not imaginative. Can see it coming. This is part of the background music in America. Americans who aren't unemployed and do have a house are afraid that in the next few years they could lose their job, their security, and they're worried about their kids. A woman in a service industry, an immigrant to America from Eastern Europe, who's been here about 20 years, took me aside recently. Her eldest child, a senior in high school, is looking around at local colleges. She was worried about AI and asked for advice on what her son, might study so that in 4 years he could get a job. We asked ChatGPT, which advised embodied in-person work, such as heating and air conditioning technician, pool cleaner. She wasn't happy with that. She worked herself to the bone to get her son higher in the world than she is. She wants him to own the pool. That is how Americans think. Rise. They want to know their government is thinking about AI. They want a sense that someone in charge sees the big picture. They want to hear there's a plan. Mr. Trump sees the development of AI simply as a matter of competition with China and of economic growth, which is dependent right now on AI. He shows no sign of seeing any dark side to it, has no apparent plans to regulate it, and is beating back state attempts to impose limits. He's given his friends, the AI broligarchs, in Ed Luce's term in Financial Times, carte blanche. What happened the last time Mark Zuckerberg had carte blanche? Haven't we read about all the billionaires powering AI who have safe houses and bunkers to which to flee, and if and when the world they're inventing goes under? Mr. Trump seems alive to none of this, but regular people are, and this has more to do with our economic unease than we credit. Those around the president believe the next big moment for him comes in January, with a State of the Union address, when he can reset the table with a great speech. Maybe. Those addresses don't have the power they once had, but still retain some. He might focus on things people are really thinking about: AI, inflation, and how Americans in their 30s and 40s can get together to buy a house and have a baby and keep this whole lumbering thing called America going. You've been listening to a reading of articles and journals from the December 13th and 14th, 25 issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print